It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are talking about High Times in the Low Parliament by Kelly Robson. A weird little book.
Yes.
Would you like to do the plot or shall I?
I will, and then you can expand on it.
All right.
This is a book about a stoner with beautiful handwriting who tries to prevent Brexit through the power of dance.
Yeah, no, that's entirely accurate. I almost don't feel like I want to expand on that at all. So we are in a sort of fantasy medieval setting in which there are fairies.
Yes.
And the fairies have convened, or at least enforcing, a parliament of European nations, fantasy European nations.
Yes.
To which our hero is sent as a scribe against her will. And she must figure out a way to get the various humans to actually agree on something, or else the fairies will drown the whole parliament and incidentally her beneath the waves.
Yes.
Yes. Brexit is very much the deal.
Yes. Her country are called the English.
Yes, they are very much the English. Their boroughs have comedy English style names.
Yes.
None of which I can remember, but they're like, Bumthwacket on lower middle brow.
Yes.
And, are there lesbians in this book?
Well, there's no men, so, literally left in the universe, as far as I can tell. So, yes.
I don't recall if it's ever said what happened to them.
No, I have theories, but,
I look forward to hearing them.
Yes, Lana's very much a lesbian. You kind of get the impression that she'd be a lesbian even if there were men, because she's really into girls.
You kind of get the impression that she'd be a man if there were men. Which, more on that later, perhaps. Are there wizards?
Well, there's fairies. The fairies are basically wizards.
There are fairies, and there is Nigel Farage.
Yeah, sure.
So, except as a woman, because, as we have said, there are no men. And so they are in conflict. If the imminent threat of death is definitely close enough to conflict, I would say.
Yes.
So why should you read this book?
It's interesting.
Yeah.
It is a strange little book, but it is interesting.
We have been asking for books that defy easy interpretation or, normal structure.
Yeah.
And this is that.
Yeah.
And it's sort of odd because, when we say, it's about Brexit is, a way to try to explain it.
But also to be fair, the blurbs suggest that it's supposed to be very relevant and current and important. So.
Yeah. No, it's definitely about Brexit in a way. But if you try to read it as a political allegory, you will wind up down a blind alley very quickly, I think. So...
Its political allegories are more vibes based than, one-to-one.
This strikes me as sort of somebody who got very sad about Brexit and then had a sort of hallucinatory feeling about it and wrote a little book. It's very entertaining and it's very short. So, you're not losing much if you dip into it, I would say.
Yeah, and it's one of those books that I feel like even if you hate it, it's, like you said, it's not long, but also I think that people should just read more strange books, even if we don't end up liking them. I think it's good for us.
I agree. You never know when you might find something that pulls on an odd thread of you.
Exactly.
And that may be to your benefit, ultimately.
Yes.
Or then again, may not.
If nothing else, it will make your comfort reads, seem a little bit fresher and more comforting.
Yes, there is that. There is always the, this annoyed me and I don't understand why, and maybe digging into why it annoyed you will be fruitful in the end.
Or maybe it won't be, but again, I think that variety is good for us, and sometimes reading books for this podcast, being candidates for this podcast, they all get kind of samey. And so I really enjoy things that...
And this one wasn't.
This one certainly was not.
Yes. Why shouldn't you read this book?
Oh, I forgot one other reason why you should
whoops.
read this book,
Go
which
ahead.
is if you really missed the names in Ruthless Lady's Guide to Wizardry, definitely read this book. That will scratch that itch for you.
Yes, silly names abound. But that being said, why shouldn't you read this book?
Well, if you're looking for anything that's straightforward, then this isn't particularly useful.
Yeah, no, if you like me are in the habit of trying to solve books, you may find it a frustrating chew toy.
And I think that the blurbs that talk about how this is such a, relevant, current, important book, might be overselling it a bit.
I don't think this has anything useful to say. I mean, at least in terms of potential solutions to the world we're living in, but it's certainly a reaction to the world we're living in.
Yes.
So, it might provide some new avenues of looking at the world that we're living in.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't think there are any like super major reasons why you shouldn't read it, except that you might find it annoying.
If drug stuff is a trigger for you, then don't read this book because it is a stoner comedy.
We'll move on to trigger warnings then. So, yes, there are fantasy drugs here which don't really work like real world drugs. Which I will get. I promise I'll get into a very brief discussion of that later on, because talking about what drugs do is one of the most boring subjects.
It super is.
So I'll make that one brief. But so there's drugs. There is conscription.
Yeah.
Threats of violence. Making people do what they're, making people do things under duress through the threat and reality of violence. In particular state violence, kind of the fairy UN just murders somebody.
Several somebodies.
Yes,
I believe. I mean, also Brexit.
Yeah, if you don't want to think about Brexit anymore, I mean, it's been a while now. I think that maybe that particular...
Well, sort of. I mean, it's still kind of an issue, right? They're still negotiating all sorts of things.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely still an issue, but it's not the only thing that the British press talks about, which was the case for years. And the British press have moved on to talking about a variety of other even dumber things that have happened since. So, is anybody shocked that Isaac listens to the BBC and all this anglophilic nonsense fills him with such glee? He has opinions about Suella Braverman.
Great.
Yeah, so I think that pretty much covers the trigger warnings in case we have, as always, forgotten something.
Yeah, I think I think that pretty much wraps up the content warnings, and then we'll remember whatever we forgot later and stick it back in.
Yes, indeed. All right. So on with the spoiler zone from here. It's the spoiler zone. It's the spoiler zone. It's the spoiler zone. Shout out to Alphaman. I hope you get the cops to pay for your gate and door. So I have a few questions about this book.
I doubt I have coherent answers, but let's talk about it.
I'd love to hear what you think. So you said that you had... Let's start with the women thing. So this is a story where, as we mentioned, there are no men, but there were men at one point. There is discussion of sort of mythical Henrys, who are still referred to as queens, I think. But
yes, well, they no longer have a model for what a king is. So
yes. So what, in your opinion, is the reason that there are no men left in this world? And maybe more to the point, why do you think the author chose to do this?
So I think that this is just purely imagination, but my theory about this world is that it is actually that it is actually just a far future fantasy of our own world, and that eventually the fairy kind got so sick of what we were doing to our own world that they came and destroyed all the men and started ruling humanity, and expecting this to work, and are just increasingly frustrated that it still isn't working.
Only to find that people are people, as we so often find. Yes.
Yes. I think why are there no men in the story? I don't know. Of course, the author is dead, so I don't know. But but I feel like, for one thing, it can be useful because making everybody women stops you from reading certain gender dynamics into how everybody's relating. You can just make everybody an equal opportunity asshole.
This is true. And with the Brexiteers, it can be very tempting to blame it on a particular kind of British man. They called the Brexiteers gammons. Hey ho, said Rowley, all these white men who were bad at tanning. With the roly-poly gammon and spinach, hi-ho, they won anyway. But I think that misses the point slightly, or this author would certainly think that misses the point.
There are also terrible women involved in all level of politics. And I think for one thing, the zeitgeist is not with a book that's all about men. If you have a book that's all about men, it's what happened to the women, and it becomes a conversation point. But with just the current zeitgeist the way it is, you can write a book that's just a small world building detail is that something has happened to all the men and nobody cares about it anymore. And then it actually sort of allows you to take gender out of the equation in an interesting way.
It is a useful shortcut. Yes, I agree. And yeah, when I said did the author choose to do this, I guess the correct author's dead way to say that would be, what does this choice do for this book?
Right.
Why is this useful in the context of this book? What does it allow the book to do?
The other thing is that it allows Lana to be a dirtbag lesbian.
Yes, indeed.
Which is a character type that, of course, you are not limited to a world without men to have, but it really, if you really want a dirtbag lesbian without the lesbianism actually being a point, then again, a world without men really helps.
If you're thinking of a dirtbag lesbian, your thoughts might turn to Gideon, but I encourage you to think again and picture yourself a little goblin who lives on ketamine and cigarettes. Yes. In case it wasn't clear, our protagonist is a lech and a sleaze. Or, depending on what archetype you want to pick, she is a hopeless romantic. But she is certainly more interested in pursuing her crush on the older woman French dancer than she is on saving the world or any other concerns that she might have.
Note that the main reason that she gets shipped off to Parliament to be a scribe, an indentured scribe, is mostly because everyone around her is so sick of her that when they start asking around for somebody who's literate, everyone's like, she's got beautiful handwriting. Yes.
No, she's enough of a problem that nobody really minded that much when she was taken off to Parliament. So yes, there is that.
Which is actually really interesting, right? Because, on the one hand, it moves the plot along, and the narrative is set up in such a way that it seems very understandable that everyone is like, yes, she's a lazy dirtbag, let's just ship her off. But, stepping outside of the narrative framework, there's, some tragedy there, that there's this young person who her entire family and social circle and neighborhood have completely written her off. And she never gets any resolution for that. She just has to accept it.
Indeed. And pursuant to why there are no men, I want to invite just imagining what the story would look like if she had been a man, and she got the arc that she gets in this story, with her ending up in a three-way relationship with the beautiful French woman and the child-bodied fairy woman. And
right.
And how that would be received.
Well, and honestly, the thing is that, dirtbag loser stumbles into saving the world and getting the hot girl is actually a really common story.
Oh yeah, 100%. So, just not within our little milieu, right?
Right, exactly.
And why shouldn't lesbians get their dirtbag loser? As we've said for many other things, but this is sufficiently untropy that I don't even mind it, to be honest.
Yes, this is sufficiently weird in other ways that it is not just why shouldn't lesbians get to also be dirtbags.
And she does learn a few lessons and grow as a person despite herself, although with great reluctance.
With great reluctance and. Only sort of, exactly. She's still, even after she has been made a member of Parliament, she's still not only getting high, but also getting everyone around her high as well.
Yes. But I think that the book actually makes a fairly compelling argument that sometimes when the world around you is just completely bleak, that one's vices if kept under control, can be what allows you to keep going. I don't think that she would have been able to make it through a week at this place without her weed and shrooms.
No, I don't think so either. And I mean, it was her sort of wandering around intoxicated. That's how she sees the dancer, and it's through her crush on the dancer that, Parliament and possibly the world is saved.
And now for like 30 seconds of drug talk. So just briefly, and I will bracket this off. There is the human drug is yeast, which is...
It's just brewer's yeast.
It's just brewer's yeast,
but it also makes you high.
Yes, it's used as the weed allegory here. It has effects that are akin to marijuana, and also the fairy gives her mushrooms, which are mushrooms.
Right.
Neither of them act precisely like weed or mushrooms. Real mushrooms don't give you, cartoon cloud cuckoo land hallucinations. But the point of being buffered from reality is really is sort of the point here. That it allows her not only to survive the utter bleakness of her surroundings, but also to be very open to beauty when it presents itself to her in the form of the dancing of the French delegate.
Yes.
And I did want to mention that, like, if you want a more accurate picture of what psychedelic intoxication is actually like, we're going to be doing a bonus episode on the nightbird's feather soon. And there are bits and pieces of that feel much more like my experiences with drugs than anything in this book did. But we'll just close the book on that, unless you have anything else to say about the drug part.
No, I mean, most of my drugs are legally prescribed.
Indeed. So then I have one more question.
Okay.
And this is really the question that was on my mind for the entire book, which is, who are these fairies then? And what are they about? We have a few, we have a few leads. So the fairies are, first of all, now that there are no men, the fairies give out, babies, which is, which I think works with your theory about the fairies having done away with men entirely. The fairies are all furious and mean and angry all the time. They're incredibly grumpy and rude. But we find out from Bugbite, who is our hero's fairy friend that she makes by giving her drugs, that the reason that the fairies are doing this is because the fairies are terrified of humans. And the EU in this world is in place, much as it is in our world, to try to prevent another giant European war. Yes. Because the giant European wars tend to end very badly for the fairies. And so...
I think
yes?
The fairies represent the earth.
Yes, that is certainly one interpretation.
I mean, the fairies are doing a bunch of different things, but... To some degree, the fairies represent nature, which is why, if Parliament can't get its shit together, the entire, they will drown.
Yeah, no, it's meant to be global warming there.
Yes, and they're more scared of you than you are of them, and they're the thing, they're the thing that's supposed to suffer when, they're the thing that's supposed to suffer when humans fight.
Yes.
And they're sort of wild and uncontrollable. So... part of what, I think that they're doing several things, because it's not like we actually do have nature sitting there with a gun being like, all right, you better get consensus on this vote.
Yes, it's very funny when the fairies break out their guns, like
yes.
2/3 of the way through the story.
But, I think that's the biggest level on which they work as a metaphor. They're sort of, because fairies are always personified nature. It's
yes.
just in this case, nature's a lot angrier and a lot more murderous because we have destroyed it.
Indeed. And so on the one level, yeah, that is coherent. But on the other level, they're running this parliament.
Yes.
They represent simultaneously nature and like the UN.
Yes. slash
because
or the slash the secret cabal that runs the world.
yes, so there is a bit of a potential anti-Semitism question here. Again, we never mean that the author did this on purpose. It's just that like there's an awful lot of these stories that assume that there is somebody in charge, you know.
Right. That assumes that it has to be somebody's fault.
Exactly, and that there is that comforting illusion that that somebody that there is actually a force out there that's working toward a world government that isn't just a bunch of people trying to get as rich as they possibly can. And this is, and it's almost like
most of those rich people not even being Jewish. I just want to know.
Oh yes, like the vast majority of them, total goyim. But it's also the sort of the point that this book draws in a way is that this is both a fear and a comfort. This idea, right?
Yeah.
It's we don't you obviously don't want the men in the black helicopters to come and take you away, but it's fundamentally nice to know that there's at least somebody competent out there.
Well, I also think that it's really hard to reckon with the idea that the reason that things around you suck is because people can kind of suck.
Yes.
And that often, especially because it's, the people you like and the people around you have screwed up things around you.
Yes.
We don't, it's much more comforting to think, oh, it is somebody else's fault that things around us are terrible. And it somehow just always happens to be the same couple groups of people.
Yes, it does. And it's funny how that works. But it's like, it's also, the thing that pinged this most for me was when Bug Bite was talking about the last big European conflict and like how it was it was the people in the middle who got bulldozed, which was not just the Jews, but certainly was the Jews and various other people.
Well, the thing is that the Jews, if we're talking about the last great European conflict, weren't so much the people in the middle who got bulldozed. They were the people who were one of a couple of groups of people who were specifically targeted for genocide, which is a little bit different from, say, all of the people who died in the firebombing of Dresden or the firebombing of Tokyo.
Yes, and it does actually make that point, because it's not just that she starts talking about like the humans start to destroy the fairy homes by accident, but then they actually go after the fairies and root them out of their towers, and how all the instigation that the British separatists are trying to do here involves like anti-fairy propaganda and dog whistles, which it's sort of the behavior of the consul from Lower Middlebrow is based basically on when Nigel Farage was a European parliamentarian. Nigel Farage being the leader of one of the less successful neo-Nazi parties in England, who was elected to be a member of the European Parliament and basically went there just to insult a lot of Europeans to their face and make the place work as badly as he possibly could pre-Brexit. And yeah, no, there's always like, when we mean European, when we say European, what do we mean? You can view this as like, there's dog whistles about, masculinity, there's dog whistles about, heterosexuality, and there are, of course, always little bits of anti-Semitism sprinkled throughout. And I do think that the author is aware of this. Mm-hmm. I think that in both cases there is like, it's kind of a comforting vision. It's sort of what if the Earth did have guns, What if the Earth could yell at us, What if the secret cabal that's controlling the world, we could just like, get high together and have a really good heart-to-heart talk, It's almost a sort of a healing fantasy that is very much contrary to what is actually happening. But I don't get a whiff of like actual prejudice from this one. I get a whiff of, boy, wouldn't it be nice, you know?
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're right that there's definitely a reading where this looks bad, but
Yeah, I'm not upset about it. It's just,
No.
I like to point it out when I see it.
yeah, no, and it's just a tired trope because it never is the secret cabal.
Yeah, there is kind of this problem with this particular kind of, like, Captain Planet animism, which is that, I mean, this is sort of a tangent into my personal thoughts on the matter. But I think that if you're going to personify nature, quote unquote, to the extent
Yeah.
that thing exists, or the earth, like wounded, scared, and grumpy doesn't really approach the thing,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to actually do that, you have to understand that this is once again, it's this like tedious idea that we're not part of it, that we are somehow not the same thing as the earth. We're part of the same process that creates and sustains everything else. And now I'm just like proselytizing, so I'll stop. But it's because that's what I believe. It's a reason that I just sort of like I don't really even understand the assumptions that underlie this, much less setting up the earth as a bunch of bratty kids who are secretly afraid of you. So you are a colony of single cells, which are themselves colonies for canals, and you all work together sometimes. And a lot of what you eat is currently alive, and you host bacteria in order to survive. You're a crew in a zoo in a thrumming hive, and you think of yourself as I. And Gaia theory is whatever. I'm not here trying to be clever, but I think you're headed for conceptual defeat when you try to separate yourself from your meat.
I mean, it is actually, fairies do work as the fairies do work here as a metaphor for nature, and that it's something that used to be scary historically to humans and then became, lovable, and now is starting to be scary again.
There is that, yes.
And, so that's, I don't actually think that that's terrible. Let's actually segue, though, into talking about her relationship with Bugbite, the fairy, who starts off in a position of power over her, who really has a position of power over her the entire time, and starts off, like, torturing her, just for fun, out of frustration and boredom. And then by the end, they are in a happy polytriad with the French dancer delegate.
Yes, indeed. So, yeah, there is some... I mean, it's one of those things where it's like... you can have arguments about like what the appropriate way to deal with somebody who is being in authority over you and is being abusive is. And it's like, in an ideal world, the answer is, of course, off with their heads. But,
or, some form of truth and reconciliation.
Or some form of truth and reconciliation, or, hit the bricks, if that's an option, and never speak to them again. But I think that, like, the whole, win them around to your side because there's no other option is a pretty valid approach, honestly. Like, particularly if you can do it without then becoming their little peon and, and assistant bully, which is often how that actually goes.
Yeah.
But our hero, despite being a bit of a himbo, is a good enough person that that she does not immediately turn around and sort of try to bully everybody else around her using Bugbite's friendship as a crutch rather, or
no, yeah,
weapon.
It's true. She's like, Lana really tends to mean well and does not seem interested in causing harm ever.
Yeah, exactly.
Including the time when she shows up.
She doesn't really care about the consequences of her actions, but she doesn't mean badly as a general matter.
She doesn't mean badly, and she does back away. There's the time that she shows up at her crushes that she and Bugbite show up at Eloquentia's with some booze and some snacks, and Eloquentia takes the drink and says, "Oh, thank you, this will help me sleep well." And Lana goes, clearly this is a brush off. I'm not gonna, doesn't push the issue, is about ready to leave.
Yes. No, she had, I mean, I called her himbo just now. She has the basic himbo qualities of being dense, but not stupid, and being,
Fundamentally
romantic,
good-hearted.
Fundamentally good-hearted, and a romantic, if sometimes, but like cares about consent. That's a big one for the himbo.
Yeah.
Even if they're hitting on you, they take no for an answer.
Yeah. And but the reason that I was interested in her relationship with Bugbite, because it works as a sort of as that, but there's this really interesting bit partway through where Bugbite is her friend now, and she's just consumed a bunch of, I think it's still yeast at this point, and she looks at Bugbite as filled with this sense of goodwill and love towards her, even though the fairy has a gun that she has already used on Lana and will probably use again.
When you start looking into this particular question, it would help if we had a more or a less overdetermined metaphor in terms of what the fairy was. Because if we look at the fairy as like, a human being that our hero is in the process of falling in love with, this becomes very complicated. But if the fairy is still like a symbol of one thing or another or several things at once, it's sort of growing to love the earth despite the fact that it could demolish you at any moment.
Well, see, this is the problem with turning people into symbols and vice versa.
It sure is.
Yes, I agree. It's just that this is, again, another example of, another really dark moment in the book where she's, where Bugbite basically says, well, you're one of the good ones. To this,
100%.
Person under her power. And she is filled with affection because, hey, Bugbite has tased her a bunch, but at least she hasn't been nearly as mean as her family.
Yeah, no, I would not call this a model relationship.
But it's not even just, I'm not actually criticizing the relationship. I think that it's another example of how this is, actually quite a dark book. It's just hiding it under a bunch of, stoner escapades.
Yeah, no, I think that, I think that this book is smart enough to have some doubts about its own happy ending through, explaining the concept of cooperation via the medium of dance.
Right.
Which is still very funny.
Yes.
I think this is a very cynical book in some ways.
Because it has this happy ending, but the happy ending feels fairly empty compared to everything that's sort of led up to it.
Yes.
And, it is a story with an absurdly happy ending that leaves you walking away feeling like there's no such thing as happy endings.
Well, we know how this story ends. The Parliament drowns, right? The oceans are rising. It's too late to do anything about it.
Right, but the thing is that's, climate despair is very much an easy out from all the various things that we can do about it. So...
What do we mean by we? Does we include the powerful and rich? Does we include humanity? Or is it you and your friends? And if so, what exactly are you going to do about all of this? Yeah, so it's like... So it's sort of walking that line in a way. And also, it may be easier to look upon the situation as it stands and see a way out when you're high.
I'm not convinced.
That it's easier?
Yeah. And I'm also not convinced that this book presents a particularly compelling explanation, particularly compelling argument that, drugs is the way to get ourselves out of the situation that we've gotten ourselves into.
Oh no, I don't think it really believes that. But
no, I think you're, which is fine because those stories tend to be really annoying. But I mean, I think you're right that part of the point of this book is that the world sucks. We're never going to be able to afford a house. Might as well indulge in our vices.
Yes, very much so. And there was I can't remember which book it was when we were talking about this, where I was getting on my high horse, as I often do, about like, well, this isn't the ideal way to deal with this situation or in this abusive relationship. And, this way this person is treating this other person is wrong. And the narrative doesn't seem to be. And, I've either you or Leora, man, my memory's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this isn't a portrait of how things would go under ideal circumstances, but it is a portrait of how people might, of how people continue to live under really, desperate circumstances.
Yeah.
And maybe even that this is the best way to handle it when you are living under very desperate circumstances. And so, yeah, no, I mean, for a very cynical book, I think it has a lot of compassion for just about everybody except the people who are making it worse on purpose.
who in a hilarious scene show up trying to just, sabotage Parliament, and they're all wearing life jackets
under their clothes and trying to be inconspicuous about it, which is incredibly funny. Yeah, no, that's my favorite. The whole book is worth it for that scene. It's
I agree.
They show up shuffling and creaking because they're all wearing floaties,
underneath their parliamentary robes.
Which brings to mind all these, sort of, it doesn't matter because we'll have our, rich person bunkers, narratives that are floating around.
That's I feel like that is the moment also when the metaphor just is most absolutely pitch perfect.
Yes, very much so. And then and then it's like, well, no, I don't know, actually. Are you sure? Because, some of those natural disasters even money isn't going to keep you away from them,
Right, exactly. No, and so the thing is, I'm not in any way condemning this book for Lana and Bugbite having a complicated relationship. I actually think that their shifting relationship is that the book sells it pretty well.
Yeah, it's the best, sort of emotional. It's the emotional arc of the book.
It is. Basically. It's the emotional arc of the book, and the part of it is that they become friends, and then they become. And then they become romantically involved because they're both in love with the same person, which is also that thing that people always say they want love triangles to resolve with. And in this case, it works fairly well, partly because they were already friends. No, I guess it's the reason why I'm poking at some of the sort of the layers of cynicism and compassion and, throwing up your hands in despair is I'm trying to figure out if there's whether or not there is more to this book than just sort of a meditation on our situation. Or if it is just mostly that, but interestingly written with some good jokes.
I think it's the latter. But I'm willing to be, talked around. I think that, the part of it that seems the most that seems to step out of that framework the most is Eloquencia, who's an interesting object of desire, being like this, she's very French, first of all. She is consumed with ennui. Being French is a natural consequence of being French.
Yes.
And terribly beautiful, which is another consequence of being French. And
she suffers from terminal Frenchness.
Yes, she does. It's an affliction with her. But despite that, and despite the fact that it's very funny that Lana is very clearly into older women and is having a moment upon finding out that the object of her desire is old enough to be her mother. There's it seems to the journey into hope that really seems to matter is Eloquencia's, right? Despite how silly the dance of, because she is French, she mimes putting boxes on top of other boxes to convince to convince people to go along.
But it's so beautiful that people are really sold.
I mean, have you seen some of those mimes? I mean, all joking aside, some of those mimes are really incredible at what they do. But
no, I actually found that a reasonably convincing scene, in that like really good dance and really good art in general can sell you on the most mundane things being sublime. This is true. The point.
This is absolutely true. And so it's like, yeah, I think that the place where the book is a little bit, does have some of that hope shine through, is that this is the oldest, tiredest and woman who has given up on everything and who responds with yells of laughter to the very idea that she might be able to make a difference or that people might be willing to listen to her. And she is talked around, and what talks her around to actually trying again is just Lana's complete, obdurate, young, stupid affection and optimism.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, despite everything, I think that like maybe one of the takeaways from this book is that despite everything, there are still children being born, and they are still going to have to live in this world, and they're still going to grow up, and they're still going to be kids and then adults.
So to some degree, it's saying that this is that despair and giving up is a completely reasonable reaction, but the only way out is to find some form of hope, and what the heck, try whatever crazy thing you can.
It may be a reasonable reaction to an incomplete picture, like if you can look at, you can look at the facts of the matter, and also the way that people are and govern themselves, and you can think, okay, despair is the only reasonable reaction to this.
Right.
But there's also the question of, okay, but is despair ever actually reasonable? Is it, from a sheer utilitarian perspective, which, more on that again in the Nightbird's Feather, but does that actually make sense, for the human project? Or maybe what makes sense for the human project is focusing on the fact that the human project continues and will continue. We're not going extinct. So your gut bacteria and their descendants, and your quiverful cousins and their descendants, and the dust mites on your skin and their descendants will all inherit the earth. This is a fact. Thinking the world ends with you is prime wizard shit. So what next? What is that going to look like, and how can we help the people who are going to have to deal with it? Yeah. Even when we ourselves are not in a position to change the shambling revenants who still control most of the money and power in the world. What can we do?
Insert warning about the shambling revenants who control money and power in the world.
Not those. It's not the ones you think. I meant the baby boomers generally, some of whom are Jewish.
Yes. I mean, and also, though, honestly, and I think that another useful message in this book is that it's not just the people in power who are making this bad. It's also that, like, sometimes your family is just shitty. Sometimes sometimes your family is shitty. Sometimes your girlfriend gets jealous that you're making friends at work and starts, like, hanging around and monopolizing all your time. Which it happens to Lana's friend, whose name I've completely forgotten.
Yes, indeed.
So,
I mean, to be fair,
a lot of us
every right to be jealous.
Yeah. But it's just people, even the people who don't have a ton of power in this are being pretty, shitty to each other all the time. And one thing, again, coming back to the fairies, but is that one of the things I think makes the happy ending more interesting is that it partly involves the fairies have to join Parliament. That's part of the sort of negotiated resolution to this crisis.
Yes.
Which, is both, they actually have to participate, and thus will hopefully gain some empathy for why everything is so hard to do all the time. But also, they get a voice now, instead of just sort of being able to stand outside and punish.
Yeah. And it's like, and then you try to think about what that would look like in a non-magical world, and
And hey, we better start making friends with cops after all, I guess.
I don't even know.
I mean, yes. Well, the thing is that because the fairies are working on multiple levels, right? I mean, on one level, it's okay, actually befriend the people who keep threatening to tase you, and also actually tasing you.
Well, maybe not all of them. I mean,
Right.
Wizards versus lesbians does not endorse being nice to policemen. Except in specific circumstances. You know, the only reason that Lana and Bugbite were able to become friends is because Bugbite was like the loser cop.
Yes.
Who was, you know, consigned to scribe wrangling duty, which is like traffic cop, you know, level.
Right. So, okay, make friends with the traffic cops, share your weed with them, and maybe we can achieve the healed world after all.
I mean, it's a beautiful sentiment.
It is. It's a beautiful sentiment.
It's a lovely dream.
You know, and also through the power of art.
Yeah. And, like, despite what I said earlier, you know, I've seen some professional dance productions which moved me profoundly and changed the way that I looked at things.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite things in the world. So
no, I mean it is art is definitely powerful. I don't think that anybody who's very invested in reading fiction is going to argue that art isn't powerful. The thing that makes this a little bit silly is the idea that, you know, how much can a single work of art or even many works of art change things, and how fast can they change things? I mean, there's the Kurt Vonnegut quote about the effect of artists on ending the Vietnam War.
Yes. Or the Peter Cook quote about the effect of satirists on the Third Reich.
So, you know, but still, it is definitely nice to believe in a world where, you know, art can elevate us all, and except for the ones who've already been shot because they deserved it.
Yeah, you may befriend some cops, but some cops may need to be gunned down by fairies in the middle of Parliament.
Well, no. At that point, the fairies are still the cops, so it's maybe Nigel Farage needs to be gunned down by the cops, and then we can befriend the other cops.
Isn't that always the way? You hope somehow that the National Guard will turn out to be on the right side. Any goddamn way. I do have one note that I wish to say before we wrap this up, which is that dimples appeared again in here.
I think this is one of these things that now that you've learned what they are, you're going to start noticing them everywhere.
Well, except, you know, she is trying to, she's noticed the dancer's dimples and is trying to find a rhyme for dimples that isn't rude. And I don't think there is a rude rhyme for dimples. That one really brought me up short. I was thinking, you know, pimples isn't really a rude rhyme. I think that it was just sort of like gesturing at potential rudeness. It's a koan, as many things in this book are. Like, what is the rudest rhyme for dimples? And are there, in fact, any rude rhymes? Are all rhymes rude? You know, what does it mean to bring the fairies into Parliament? What do the fairies represent? And so on.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I very much enjoyed this little guy, and I am, you know, it's a little creature, this book.
It is. It's a little creature.
I had fun with it.
Yeah,
and so
me
more
too.
weird little things like this, you know.
Yes.
If you have to sell it as like a straightforward political satire, which it very much isn't, then that's fine.
Yes,
you know?
I mean, I'm just, and it's honestly just the one cover blurb that says deeply relevant, you know, funny, outlandish, and deeply relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading it during the latest debt ceiling wrangling.
Well,
felt pretty relevant.
Yeah, no, it did feel pretty relevant.
If anything, true. Even more relevant than Brexit, because Brexit was actually about something, you know.
I mean, the debt ceiling is if the Brexiteers were specifically, actually, in some ways, it works better for that metaphor because
that's what I was saying.
Specifically trying to drown the world, assuming that they'll be fine with their floaties. But of course, I do think that the Brexiteers also felt that way.
Agreed.
So, not that, I mean, you follow British politics way closer than I do.
No, I think that there's definitely something to that. Although, what I think in large part is that there are a lot of people who think that England should still have an empire, despite all evidence to the contrary.
Yes.
So, unless there's anything else that you want to add?
No, I feel like we have picked this book apart slightly more than it actually could hold.
Yes. We will also probably have a bonus episode for you coming out pretty soon because I'm bursting with them. So tune in for those.
All right.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Next time on Wizards vs. Lesbians, it's Some Desperate Glory.